Before we get started, I just would like to acknowledge that we have present the interim chief of police is here. Thank you for coming. And also the interim city manager and current fire chief, Eric Litzenberg, is here. Here he is. And we also have a number of police officers and fire department employees who are also present today. This was a great group. I was co-chair of this group.
What more needs to be said? How much water do you use?
Sasha Anderson was co-chair of this group, and she'll be delivering the presentation. But we have also present members who will contribute to certain portions that they have an expertise in. So we'll go ahead and get started, Sasha.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And thank you so much to the chairs of the groups and also to Mayor Weber for allowing us this opportunity. So before we get started, I want to say thank you so much to Judge Vigil for co-chairing the group, as well as all of our members. We were exceptionally lucky to have a number of subject matter experts who are leaders within our community to bring a real interdisciplinary approach to talking about public safety. So I'm excited to be joined by Maria Jose Rodriguez Cadiz, who is the Executive Director of Solace Crisis Center, as well as Emily Kaltenbach, who is the Executive Director of the Drug Policy Alliance, Marcela Diaz, Executive Director of Somos en Pueblo Unido, Miranda Viscoli, who is the founder of New Mexicans to Prevent Gun Violence, as well as Jerry Trujillo, who heads up Santa Fe Community College's Criminal Justice Department and is a retired police officer. We just had an incredible group. We are not joined today by Barbara Salas, the former fire chief, or Jennifer Manzanares, who is a community advocate, but they contributed greatly to our group. We were very, very lucky to have them. I also want to, within this room, Judge Vigil initiated this, but I want to give a big thank you to all of our public safety providers who are here, who work tirelessly to keep our community safe and healthy. So thank you all so much for being here. We really appreciate it. So just to talk a little bit about what our group attempted and talked about sort of exhaustively. I think we met sometimes twice a week to talk about these issues. Public safety is a huge issue, not just within its core, but also with the issues with which it intersects. We found within our conversations that there were a number of challenges and opportunities, and I want to speak to those initially because I think they're really important in framing the discussion. Part of, I think, what is a challenge within public safety is that we have a number of other areas which are underserved. Behavioral health, problematic drug use, public health. These are all areas that we have tasked our public safety personnel with addressing because they're not being addressed outside of this issue. So we've actually asked our public safety personnel to sort of step up and take on roles that they might not have to take on, that they shouldn't have to take on, that make their jobs harder in a lot of ways. And so part of what we're addressing through our document is addressing these areas to alleviate some of the stress on our public safety personnel. Essentially filling in the gaps for services, as well as increasing the number of tools that our public safety personnel have when they're faced with these challenges. So a lot of what we focus on within our memo are continuation of programs that are working, that in many cases need to be expanded. So for example, the Mobile Integrated Health Office, our LEAD program, our diversion programs, things that can really help increase our public safety. But we also identified opportunities for new approaches. So for example, restorative justice, and as well as partnerships to enhance the development and opportunities for our law enforcement personnel, for our fire personnel. And what we really wanted to focus on, and I know Jerry will talk about as we move on, was this development of a public safety group, public safety community that could really enhance the lives of our public safety personnel. So increasing development through higher education, opportunities for higher education, and addressing all of the challenges that come with that. Really developing homegrown personnel, and also developing the quality of life and the sense of community, and the integration of our public safety personnel within our community as well. So that's sort of what we focused on. And so within our memo and in our discussions, we focused on a handful of areas that we felt were really important to address when we talked about public safety. We talked about problematic drug use, the ways in which we can decrease that and address that, and free up our law enforcement personnel, our fire and emergency medical personnel from essentially having to address these. We also talked about recruitment and training, how we sort of design public safety departments that are cohesive and functional and happy and have really effective organizations. We addressed issues with our immigrant issues to help our immigrant community, gun violence prevention, the idea of restorative justice, which is a really exciting approach, as well as behavioral health issues. So that is sort of the overview of where we began. It's not exhaustive, but it is extensive. So without further ado, if any, we can kind of move through our members and speak. Fantastic. I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Sasha and Judge Michael Vigil, for your outstanding work with this work group. And you're going to get very tired of this, but each of us want to recognize our law enforcement and first responders in the room. We really appreciate your work and your service for the community. My name is Maria Jose, and I am the director at the Solace Crisis Treatment Center, which is your local sexual assault service provider. There is just about nothing that we do without our law enforcement. We even co-house with them, so we live with them through the day and in the after hours, the special operations that they have to sometimes coordinate. And what's clear to us is that there is nothing more unsafe in any community than to have members of our community that do not trust their police and cannot go to them. It is also a recipe for disaster to not make very clear priorities and what we need to do for our law enforcement and first responders. What we do and what we don't do for them, it is going to be directly proportional to the amount of safety that we have. So it's simply a mistake to not make those priorities. And it starts with very basic variables, which are recruitment and pay. If we don't have a force that can be recruited in our local community, that can be promoted in within, that can be resilient and feel supported, basically we're cutting our community in safety. Is that clear? And I think that is probably the opinion of all of you in the room, and it's about making clear steps towards those priorities. And in my field of work, I also know how important it is to promote methods and processes that are going to keep the resiliency of our law enforcement as intact as possible, so they can have the longevity and the health that they deserve. So I will look forward to questions later in this area, and I will pass the mic around to the rest of my members.
Thanks, Maria Jose. I'm Emily Kaltenbach. I work with the Drug Policy Alliance, and I'm really pleased to look out and see how many people I've worked with on problematic drug use that are in the audience. Some of our law enforcement officers to local community foundations. Many years ago, we came together and created a task force that eventually led to the Law Enforcement Assisted Diversion Program. Santa Fe was the second in the nation to do this. And the idea is diverting people into social supports and treatment before they're actually even booked and have to walk through the criminal justice system. That model can be very powerful. It's also a test in patience, though, because changes like that are really huge in a community like ours to really think differently about how we address problematic drug use in our community. We recognize that our families many of our families and friends suffer from problematic drug use. They cycle in and out of our criminal justice system without getting the treatment and supports they need. We're putting incredible pressure on our public safety officers and EMS personnel to address problematic drug use when it really should be addressed outside in the community-based systems. So they have the opportunity to direct their scarce resources to more pressing violent crime in our community. And so this group really spent some time thinking about how we can do that. As Sasha mentioned, expanding access to diversion programs and educating why diversion, pre-arrest diversion, is a good model for our city. Really recognizing that we don't have enough access to treatment and social support systems necessarily in our city, or coordinating them. For example, people who are suffering from opioid addiction can go into our county jail, but there is no medication-assisted treatment at this point, and I know it's a discussion that's happening for those individuals. And so then they're back on the streets days later, and they're the most vulnerable to overdose. They're the ones that we know are committing property crimes to sustain their addiction. And so it really is a public safety issue in addressing it through a public health lens. And I'll just end with saying that we surveyed residents, adult residents in the city just a month ago through a poll, and 90% said that we need to change how we're dealing with drug use, and it should be a public health and a rehabilitation issue instead of a criminal justice issue. So I think the people are there. We just have to figure out how to expand those recommendations. And there is a municipal drug strategy task force that has been established, and we have our first meeting next week. And so I think there'll be additional set of recommendations that come out of that group, and that also includes alcohol. So I want to make sure we're so focused on opiates, which is important, but we know that alcohol is a serious issue in our community, and drugs like methamphetamine are very serious, and we're seeing increases there. So let's get ahead of the curve and address all of those issues. So I look forward to working with that group on those issues. So thank you.
Thanks. Hi, my name is Marcela Diaz. I'm with Somos Un Pueblo Unido. Really happy to have been a part of this committee with all these folks. But I do want to acknowledge some of the folks from Somos who participated back at Somos in making some of these recommendations, and also Susan Hare from the Santa Fe Immigration Committee, who also helped with these recommendations on immigrants and public safety, as well as restorative justice. I actually have notes, because if I don't read from my notes, I will be too long-winded. So I've learned over the years. So as was stated earlier, immigrants make up 15% of Santa Fe and lived in mixed status families. And immigrants are key to building an inclusive and effective public safety and community policing program within Santa Fe. So while the city has really strong policies prohibiting cooperation with federal agencies specifically to enforce immigration laws, immigrant families are still living in an increasingly hostile anti-immigrant environment. Just yesterday, we received many calls at Somos about ICE in town arresting folks for being undocumented at their work sites. And so this is something that can be very concerning when threatened daily with deportation by federal and sometimes state law enforcement agencies. We know that this has a detrimental impact on our city's ability to affect good public safety and support community trust. So we actually have a very good framework in the city through a welcoming community resolution that was passed in February 2017 to really address some of these issues. That was co-sponsored by Councilor Villarreal, who's also in the room. It provides that solid framework to support the integration of immigrants into our current and new, hopefully, public safety programs. And if fully implemented, it can really help our law enforcement and other public safety personnel in their hard and essential work. So some of the things that resolution calls for, we want to highlight. The others are in your memo, and that is that we want to make sure that there's ongoing training for public safety personnel about the changing nature of immigration laws and ICE enforcement tactics that could impact the trust, despite really implementing these I won't say sanctuary, quote unquote, these non-inquiry policies and these strong public safety policies. We need to make sure that our city is up on the changing nature of immigration enforcement in our country. We also have established an intergovernmental working group through that resolution, which brings together folks from different governments to share strategies on how to fully support and integrate immigrants, not just into public safety, efforts, but all efforts in our communities. And it would be great to have a stronger integration of public safety personnel in that intergovernmental working group. And language access. That's another one of the big issues that isn't happening in Santa Fe. And so through that resolution and through the Immigration Committee, we're recommending a really strong and comprehensive analysis or evaluation of language access in our city and in public safety. We want to make sure that whoever does that comprehensive review, so that our efforts are not haphazard, is to review incentive programs for bilingual personnel within public safety, compliance with state and federal language access laws, best practices in similarly sized cities, and adequate translation of forms and publications, and making sure that we are constantly, in at least in Spanish, but maybe in other languages as well, all of our public safety information, community public safety information in social media and other platforms. So those are some of the recommendations. Now on restorative justice, I'm so happy that the schools talked about that. And there's a broad range of restorative justice programs, but it really is in criminal justice programs. RJ, or restorative justice, is a victim-centered and community approach to crime that we feel protects and restores and improves public safety across the board. Research shows that these kinds of programs, when implemented within the criminal justice system in other communities, reduces recidivism, decreases incarceration of young people, lowers cost in the criminal justice system, and most important, it has high participant satisfaction among victims, offenders, stakeholders, and public safety personnel and law enforcement officials that are a part of it. So we don't currently have real viable restorative justice programs within our community, within our criminal justice system. So we're actually recommending, and a lot of people on this group would like to be a part of that, and in helping recommend a working group that over the course of the year can really research best practices, evidence-based kinds of programs that we could pilot in Santa Fe, so that we can really take a more holistic approach and really give young people, victims, a voice within the criminal justice process, a different kind of voice, and also young people who are having a hard time figure out how to make better choices and feel the support in the community. So that's kind of what we talked about with restorative justice.
I can be very brief because there's not much we can do with gun violence prevention. My name is Miranda Viscoli. I'm with New Mexicans to Prevent Gun Violence. I want to thank this wonderful committee and their wonderful sense of humor on kind of dark subjects. And I also want to thank the mayor for putting so many committees together so that we could all really brainstorm. The reason why I will be brief is because we have preemption laws in New Mexico. There's very little we can actually do as a local municipality on gun violence prevention by laws. So if we wanted background checks on every gun sale in the city, we can't do it because of our state preemption laws. That being said, there are some things that we can do. And what New Mexicans to Prevent Gun Violence, what we're really working on right now is safe gun storage. When you look at the Youth Resilience Survey, depression amongst teenagers spiked. We have to get parents to lock up their guns. 12.7% of those homes where a teenager is suicidal or depressed is with an unlocked gun. And I really recommend that we partner with the Sky Center to figure out how those guns can be removed, how they can be stored until things get better. So that's something that we can do but without passing any laws. We have a fantastic police department that we've had the honor to work with since 2013. And there are a few things that we can do. If a gun gets stolen, require that person to call it in so they can go get that serial number gets put in, and then start following where the crime guns are going. And the Brady campaign has an amazing program that they will just hand over to you in terms of tracing where the crime guns are going. And in addition to that, really doing a huge public education campaign to get gun owners to lock up their guns. There are a ridiculous amount of guns getting stolen out of cars, and the folks stealing those guns, that's the first crime, right? The second, third, fourth crime will continue to follow. So that is what we would recommend in terms of gun violence prevention.
Thank you. My name is Jerry Trujillo. I retired from Santa Fe Police in 2010, and since then I've been working at the Santa Fe Community College. I am currently the lead faculty for the Criminal Justice Program. And I want to say, Mayor Alan Weber, Dr. Gonzalez, Judge Vigil, what a fantastic group you put together here. It was a lot of fun talking about these subjects, and and it made us think and critically think on what was best for our community with some of the issues that we face today. The focus and information that I was able to bring to the table was recruitment and training. It was based on a community policing philosophy for our officers and our first responders, for community-based approaches for law enforcement. And there's evidence-based information that this in our memo, if you review the memo, and you'll think they have access to the full memo. These are some clips that we have right here of what we talked about. We talked about educated police force with more training to help provide the best professional performance that's available to our city. Right now, we do have great first responders. We do have a great police force that works with the community, and we'd like to see that continue and enhance that. We spoke about the well-being of our first responders as well, because they are exposed to traumatic events on a daily basis or a monthly basis, but throughout their career they will see many traumatic events, and we want to make sure they're healthy and their well-being is being considered as well as they focus on our community. Some of the other things we talked about was what are the barriers and some of the variables that prevent officers and our first responders from living in Santa Fe, and what are those barriers that we could work on to help officers, and even when they retire, to stay in our community and keep contributing to the community in different capacities. So when we talked about education and further the training, it was found there's some evidence-based studies that show that educated and trained officers, yes, they do perform better internally for promotion and so forth, but also in our community with critical thinking, with problem solving, with interacting with our citizens and all of us that are in the community. And we talked about issues, as you'll see in the about recruitment. How do we keep our police force staffed? And that's a big challenge right now of making sure we have enough personnel to respond to the community needs that we have. But as we explore different perspectives and how to approach this and how to improve in this area to help our first responders and our police force to face these challenges, we just wanted to let them know that these are some tasks, but they're not alone. It's not. This is a community-based effort, and this is something that we want to reach out to them and say, look, these are things that may help, and these are things that we can do together, so that the list of tasks that you see before you don't seem so enduring, right? Right. Thank you.
Okay, just briefly, I know we're going to run out of time, but I've worked in this community for 35 years as a criminal defense lawyer and 18 years as a district judge, and I've interacted with our law enforcement people on a daily basis. And we are expecting so much of our police and our fire department. The number of people we're covering has expanded. The number of issues that they have to deal with has expanded, and yet their numbers are not where they should be. They're asked to do more with less, and that has to be a priority for the city, is to fully staff the department and increase their pay. And now we'll let the mayor have his first question.
I wanted to speak to the first part of your comment about increasing and fully staffing our public safety positions. I had a conversation, I guess, just yesterday with Chief Padilla about requests that keep coming into him and to his office for police personnel to be deployed to different parts of the city, particular areas where there is a high expectation that we ought to be present. And the problem, very simply for him and for the city, is we don't have the people to do that with. So I'm very interested in approaches that the group came to discuss about improving our both our recruitment and our retention policies. I think some of our policies are actually counterproductive, and they are incentives for people to leave rather than to stay. And secondly, whether you explored the idea of having a community-wide recruitment effort. We're legitimately requested by the public schools to provide police oversight, by hospitals to provide oversight. Have you witnessed, did you explore any communities where it wasn't only the responsibility of the city government and the police department to recruit more police officers, but it was shared or communally accepted that as a city we could join our hands across boundaries and become a city where we are genuinely working collaboratively to recruit and employ more public safety people?
So just to speak to the first part of the question.
Before you do that,
Oh, yes.
if you have questions, please write them on your cards and we'll get them picked up. Hold them up.
So just to speak to the first part of your question, Mayor, I think one of the things that we explored was that we have to first fully staff our recruitment staff or increase our resources that are going towards recruitment. If we're relying on one person to be heading up recruitment, it's just not going to be enough. The second portion of that answer is that we also have throughout our memo really stressed that we must have opportunities for law enforcement officers and first responders to have input into this process. The answers are there within these departments. We have to figure out a way to capture them. So you'll find throughout the memo that we very much explored that. Now, with that said, I'm going to defer to Jerry, who is our recruitment expert.
I wouldn't say I'm a recruitment expert, but thank you. But anyhow, yeah, that's been that's a challenge with law enforcement across the nation is recruiting efforts. So this was a topic that we talked about, and this would be something it'd be challenging for Santa Fe Police to do this on their own, and it has been challenging. So when we look at recruiting efforts, look at locally, we look at regionally, but also what type of officer is the right fit for our community. And with those efforts, we add those challenges to make sure that we're getting the right person in place. But it does, like Sasha mentioned, it does take a team of people to recruit and to recruit the right person for the position. And it is a challenging task because of all the checks and balances that they have to go through with the background checks and so forth. There's only a small percentage that pass all the checks and balances to become a police officer. So with that, it is a team effort. It's I think if there's just one person assigned to the recruiting division, it may be overburdensome for one person, especially if we need to staff because of annexation for a larger area. There's more population. The numbers aren't there. So with that said, that's to make some of the recruiting efforts occur, it's going to require some more collaboration with police and maybe some more some community input as well as input from internally from the police department.
Okay, I have a question.
This report seems to have very good recommendations for Santa Fe Police Department, but it appears somewhat or almost completely silent on Santa Fe Fire Department. Is there a reason for this silence on an organization which interacts so much with issues of public safety, emergency medicine, homelessness, alcohol and opiates, healthcare access, senior issues, and more?
Um, yeah, absolutely. So, right, the number of mentions of SFPD outnumbered the number of mentions of the Santa Fe Fire Department. But in particularly in speaking with former Fire Chief Barbara Salas and with Emily from Drug Policy Alliance and with a number of our members, we really tried to address the challenges facing the fire department, particularly with regard to problematic drug use and behavioral health, as those seem to be major challenges to the fire department. Emily, do you want to talk a little bit about the intersection there?
Yeah, just and briefly recognizing that if we can improve some of the outcomes, the health outcomes of our residents, whether they're struggling with alcoholism or problematic drug use or homelessness, they need access to treatment. I think we're going to have a dramatic reduction in the calls to EMS. For example, we're doing a great job right now with naloxone distribution through the fire department, and now our law enforcement officers are carrying it. Those types of interventions, I think, are really important. We're already doing it, so we didn't mention it. MIHO is mentioned here as a really critical, innovative program that needs to be supported and enhanced, and so that is a recommendation. I am just blown away by the model and how we can be a leader across the country with something like that. So those are places where it was mentioned. I think we spent a lot of time talking about how unemployment, homelessness, all of those things contribute to public safety. I think the topic of public safety is so huge that we did focus in on some areas, but I definitely think that we need to be talking about homelessness and the impact it's having on our EMS system, absolutely. And how do we address serious behavioral health issues in our community that require both our police and our EMS personnel to continue to address the same person over and over and over again. So I think the emphasis on diversion is also really important. That first early intervention, how do we get that person into services and sustainable services so that we're not burdening both systems?
Okay. One more question. In light of major raises in surrounding agencies such as APD, AFD, how do you plan on becoming once again competitive in order to not continue losing fire and police and even being able to increase their ranks? It should be noted that a large percentage of officers live outside of Santa Fe due to cost of living, and more pay for a shorter commute is increasingly attractive.
Judge Vigil, do you want to speak to this? Thank you.
Again, it's the problem of budget, and I think that what the city needs to do is decide that this is a priority because we are losing people. We're losing people to APD and AFD and any other agency across the state that may pay more money. As far as the issue of housing, there's a lot of reasons why people don't live in Santa Fe. Police officers and firemen, and one of them is affordability. So I think we need to do that, but there are other reasons, and I think a part of it is instilling the community policing idea that it's important for police who are policing our community live in our community so that they can interact with their citizens. And not live in some other community. So, but that's a whole philosophy change on community policing and the need for officers to stay here.
And so we have a broader memo to accompany this where we actually go into details a little bit more about this. But one of the other things that we discussed and really promoted was making sure that there are incentives and support within the public safety agencies for professional development, training through the Santa Fe Community College, so that we can actually continue to develop the folks that we have to be able to ascend and really create strong career paths. And so that was one of the things that we really focused on a lot in being able to ensure that we have that incentive and that support for the new recruits, but also for the people that are there to really have an opportunity. And that's only going to come with strong leadership to actually be able to support that kind of professional development and higher education attainment that will allow people to go up the ranks.
I want to thank my group for presenting. A lot of hard work went into it. You know, I learned, one of the things I learned from this group is how to use Google Document. It's amazing. It's this ongoing work during the day. People are making additions, and it just blew my mind. But thank you.
Now that we've established that Judge Hill was not running the youth group, and that's officially been acknowledged, I want to thank you for your work. I think it's impossible to sit in the mayor's chair and not realize that public safety is the first priority of any elected official in this community. And that on the one hand, we have an amazing group of people who are keeping us safe. On the other hand, as you said in your opening remarks, and as Judge Hill said, we're asking them to do more and more without expanding either their numbers or their resources. We're patching our social service holes with police and fire patches, and asking them to take on roles that we aren't actually giving them the resources to take on the work with. We are beneficiaries of your work in the social sector, people who are at the table and people who aren't at the table but who worked in this group. The city of Santa Fe depends enormously on nonprofit groups and people who step in to make a difference. And that collaboration that you spoke to is part of what keeps Santa Fe special. But I think you highlighted the critical areas where the city needs to go to work. And I also think we need to see it as not just a city responsibility. It's something where everybody has a stake. All of the folks who are asking for more services have a stake in helping us find a way to deliver those services and pay for those services, and to make sure that the people who do the work of keeping us safe have the equipment they need and the recognition they deserve. So thank you very much for your work. Appreciate it.